All right, perfect. Well, hello everyone. My name is Hassan Bazzi. I'm from Tyre, Lebanon, which is a small Mediterranean city. It's actually the fourth oldest city on the planet. And I'm here to talk to you today about serverless heaven. So about 35 years ago or so, Freddie Mercury and Queen got up on stage and in 20 minutes gave the crowd a touch of the heavens. Now, unfortunately, I don't have maybe 1% of Freddie's skill or his entire band, but what I'm going to try to do here is give you a little touch of a different kind of heaven, a serverless heaven. So first of all, let's kind of bring it back to the basics. What are we? What do we do? We're developers. We're building experiences. We're building products. And at some point, really, that is what really matters, right? I've been building products and websites since I was about 12. I started basically hustling websites in my little town back in Tyre, and that's really all that mattered. And anytime I would try to overcomplicate things or try to explain, like, I actually remember a story once where I was 13 years old, and I was trying to learn like Cold Fusion or whatever, because it was cool at the time. It's some PHP thing. And I went to this, actual person at a store. He had a DVD store. And I was selling him a website. And I'm like, yo, you're going to have a Cold Fusion website. And the person looked at me like, what is this? What is this kid talking about? Like, I just want to sell my stuff online. So what we're doing is we're building products that people love. It doesn't really matter how we get there. It just matters that we build them. So this is what a product journey usually looks like, right? You're trying to ideate. You're trying to come up with whatever you want to come up. You're working on the design. That can be a database design in terms of actual data, or it can be UX, whatever it is. And then you're developing, right? Like you're writing a bunch of code, beautiful code, preferably written with Prisma. And then you're scaling it, right? Like you're grabbing this code and you're like, okay, cool. We built this for 5 people. Now 5,000 people are here. What do we do? So the problem with this is that on that fourth step, there's a giant amount of FOMO, or fear of missing out, right? There's always something new. There's always a new framework. This was and is always the case also when you're developing your actual code. But in scaling, there's always a new, better way. There's Kubernetes, or you have to shard your database, or all this stuff where we feel as developers like, oh man, I go to a conference and I feel, oh no, I know nothing again. I have to learn stuff all over. What is this cube thing? What am I going to do? Everyone else is better than me. The reality is that's far from the case, right? We're all, again, building these beautiful products. We're going through this journey. And so how can we turn this FOMO, this fear of missing out, into JOMO, or a joy of missing out, right? I want to wake up one day and say, I am so happy that I actually don't know any of these things. I want to wake up and say, oh my God, I am so glad I know nothing about Kubernetes. Nothing against Kube, by the way. I actually love it, but it's just a good example because everyone's always kind of talking about it. So how do we do it? And what's the point of basically ignoring all of this, right? Thomas Gray once said, when ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. What he was basically saying is if you can ignore something, then it's not just bad to worry about it, it's foolish. It's foolish even to be wise about it. So if someone has solved your problem, it's okay, just let it be, right? So what does an ideal product journey then look like? So 1 and 2 don't change. You're still ideating. Obviously, we can get so much better at this. But then once you get to number 3 and you're developing, we've gotten really good at this. We have amazing frameworks, NextJS, Redwood.js, like the list goes on and on and on. And these frameworks, they don't just allow you to write good code. They take care of all the quote-unquote DevOps steps that kind of have to happen afterwards, right? You write a little bit, and then they just take care of all of it. So why can't we just have this in the scaling world, right? I want number 4 to disappear. I want that to be the repeat place where I can keep iterating on my product. I can keep making it better and better and better. And I don't have to worry about, now that we've built this feature, We have to worry about scaling it for another 3 months. So let's take things back to basics just a little bit. And we're going to talk about the mental models of scale, just very briefly. So I very proudly stole this graphic from Vercel's website. Sorry, but it's a really good one, and the credits are there. But this graphic really shows you a form of horizontal scaling, like the classic way of doing things, right? And let's kind of simplify it big time. Let's imagine you are at airport security, right? So you're at the airport, you're going through security, and there's usually more than one lane there, right? And then people start to flood in because, I don't know, there's like 5 flights going on or something. And then one of the officers says, okay, like we have to open a new lane, if they can, right? And then they begin that process of opening that lane, and they bring a bunch of people off of their lunch break, blah, blah, blah. Now, the problem with this is if they open that lane too early, then you're paying a whole bunch of people so much money, you just wasted a whole bunch of resources, right? So basically, if someone's there and they, let's say, put a threshold, they put a line somewhere and they say, once we have 10 people waiting, we open a new lane. You don't really know how fast people are going through security, so maybe by the time you've opened this new lane, the problem is not even there anymore, right? And then if you open it too late, you're going through a whole lot of congestion. And you almost basically have to be lucky. It's the same thing really in a lot of these horizontal scaling solutions. Yes, we're getting better, we're getting smarter, but at the same time, really, we're just kind of relying on CPU and memory for the most part, right? Memory's at 70%, spawn a new server, blah, 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 right? So how can we truly make things easier? Now, I'm going to just spoil the whole thing. I think that's the solution, right? Serverless. But what is serverless, and why isn't it terrifying? Every time I talk to someone about serverless, it's like the new Kubernetes, you know? It's like, oh my God, what is serverless? Why isn't there a server? What am I going to do? So folks, it's simple. First of all, there's a server, don't worry. But let's just kind of put this to rest. So serverless is super, super easy. You're writing a function, which, again, who cares that it's a function? You're writing code, right? You're writing code somewhere. It doesn't have to be a single file somewhere. Like, don't worry about that. Write code the way you would normally write code, right? You're just writing. And then a server is actually running somewhere with your code on it. So it's the same thing. And this code you're writing is scaling infinitely, right? So every time someone comes in to your website or your app or your service or whatever it is, it's scaling up. And you don't have to worry about all the actual orchestration and all the infrastructure and all the real scaling that's going on in the background, right? So that's it. In layman terms, thank you, Cube, again, someone is doing the Kubernetes for you. It's amazing, right? Someone is there worrying about all of this, and you don't have to worry about it. So again, to take this from Vercel, it's simple. One request comes in, and one invocation happens. And if we go back to the airport security model, another interesting thing happens there. So imagine you walk up to security, and then a magic lane appears. And that gets invoked in a split second. Like, this magic lane allows you to get through security, and you're good to go. And then okay, sure, there's maybe, let's say, a second for this lane to be built, but it's still pretty fast. But let's say someone comes right after you, and those few lanes are there. Then they can just reuse your lane, because it was just there. The same exact thing happens in functions, or what we call usually cold boots and hot boots. It's, when you hear these words, they're not scary. All that means is someone has recently used this function, so we invoked it, we did all the hard work, right? And now we're just going to reuse it because some other visitor or user is coming in. Again, you don't have to worry about this. And going back to airport security, imagine every time you go to airport security, you have your own lane, your VIP, right? Now, cool, you're sold, you're convinced, but as with everything in life, there are caveats and best practices, right? And the thing is, I always hear this. I always hear, if you do what you love, you will never work a day in your whole life, right? But have you actually tried deploying to serverless? Now, here's the problem. The problem isn't that it's not good. The problem is that you get all these high hopes and dreams that I just sold you. You go like, oh my God, this is great. This solves everything. And then you go to your favorite cloud provider, and you sign up, and you get your Lambda, and you start using that cool word, which it is cool. And then things are slow, or they don't work, or things are hard to debug, or you're dealing with databases in serverless, or any form of stateful event. So again, how can we bring the joy of missing out to this same problem? And it's simple. Have the super smart people. I'm not even going to call it super smart. People who are getting paid every day to just solve this for you. Let them solve it for you. And that is what people are doing in serverless. There's a bunch of people that are very good at scaling databases and sharding them and all of this, right? Let them do it. And then all you have to do is write your code. So let's talk about some of the challenges. We already spoke a little bit about cold and hot boots. We'll talk about them in a little bit. You have a bunch of size limitations to work with. You're basically sending someone code and telling them to run it somewhere. We'll talk about those. Working with databases, debugging is an interesting issue on serverless. Native APIs are not supported. What does this mean? That means if you're trying to access like the file system, you're not going to be able to sometimes. For example, in Vercel, if you're using a serverless function, it's fine, you can do it. If you're on the edge, you can't. It's the same thing with Cloudflare workers. And then you have limited execution time. So you need to get your whatever work you need to get done, like come in here, you have 15 seconds, get it done, and leave my server kind of thing. But I'm going to take care of everything for you. So how do we deal with all of this? We're going to now go into an example, right? I promise this is not a paid talk, but I'm just showing you what worked for us at Nuna. So at Vercel, the idea is that it just works. I'm not going to bore you and go through how to set it up, right? But I'm going to go through some best practices that we've gone through that are very important, like that are going to make your life easier. First of all, caching. So one of the most important things you have to do is caching your endpoints, specifically any get endpoints, right? And it's pretty simple for the most part. All you have to do in Vercel is add usually a cache control header. And there are so many things you can specify within this cache control header. One of the most important is the max age. So how often do you think this thing is going to expire? And then another thing they use is something called stale while revalidate. If you're in the front-end world a little bit, this is just like a service worker. It does things. That's usually the caching strategy in service worker. What that means is if something's in the cache, give it to the person. And in the background, go check if it changed, right? So for example, at Nuna, we have a bunch of tools. They're therapeutic tools. Did I even mention Nuna, by the way? So I'm co-founder at Nuna. It's a mental health app that helps you with stress, anxiety, and depression, right? It's simple. But the idea is, at Nuna, we have these tools, these mental health tools, right? And these tools are controlled by our psychologist. She changes them every, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. So I don't have to keep hitting the database and grabbing that all the time. So stale while revalidate, what that's going to do is it's going to give the user the latest tools, and then right after that, it's going to say, hey, Emilia, did the tools change? Or the database, basically. If it changed, cool. The next person's going to get the latest tools. Now, the next thing is, this is one of my favorites, Vercel Dev. Why is this awesome? Because developing serverless locally, usually you start developing, and then what happens is you deploy something to the cloud, and it doesn't work. So what this does is it just mimics the cloud environment locally for you by actually running your code in the serverless environment, right? So your code is literally being ran on serverless and then being piped into your local machine. All right, cool. Next, size matters, big time. So first of all, the most important thing when it comes to size mattering in this case is that when you have a whole bunch of code, so you have this giant bundle, that code still needs to be parsed and gone through. So people, for example, say, oh, my serverless function is taking 4 seconds to have a cold boot, right? And a lot of times, it's simply because it's huge. So how do we eliminate this? First of all, when we're talking about Vercel, again, in a serverless function, we have a 50 megabyte limit. Now, you might be excited. Oh, my God, I have so much to work with. It actually is, but don't use it. Try to keep your serverless functions as small as possible. Now, luckily, Vercel does some of this heavy lifting for you. We'll talk about it. But one of the most important things you should do is only importing what you need. So all of you out there doing import everything from Firebase, don't do it. It's massive. You're going to have a slow serverless function. If you need auth, just import the auth part, right? On Edge, you have a 1 megabyte limit. So that's even less. And this means this code is running right next to your user, which is amazing. And there are no cold boots at all. But again, they're limiting the size. One small caveat, by the way, about if you're using Vercel on the edge and you're using Prisma, like we are, you should be importing Prisma client edge. And what that's doing is it's basically doing things where it's no longer accessing the file system at all, just so it works. You'll probably just run into this error. It'll actually tell you, like, hey, you're importing the wrong thing. But I spent like a good 30 minutes figuring this out. And then finding alternatives. So this is interesting. When in the front-end world, so I originally was a Preact JS maintainer. And Preact JS is a tiny alternative to React. It's 3 kilobytes. And people would go like, one of the Preact maintainers are here. People would go like, why would you do this, et cetera. And we're like, well, we need to deliver less to the people and still have the same functionality. And then when we would talk about the backend, people just wouldn't care. Who cares? I can import whatever I want. Well, now it finally matters. So find alternatives, small alternatives to libraries. Luke Edwards, for example, is an awesome developer, and this is pretty much all he does. If you go look at his work, it's like, oh, you need a function that does this? Cool, I made a 10-byte alternative to it. And then when it comes to the heavy lifting, so Vercel is going to do your tree shaking, which means if you import just the auth from Firebase, it's going to only bundle that. If you import just that one function, it's only going to have that in your final Lambda. And then it's going to bundle stuff. Why does this matter? Again, if you're trying to build serverless on your own, you have to figure all of this out. You have to figure out that, oh my God, I have 10 functions, and a bunch of people are coming in, and they're calling, let's say, 2 of them. And every once in a while, someone is calling that third one, so that one's always cold. So when Vercel thought about this, they're like, oh, OK, cool. Let's bundle them all within limit, right? And so when someone comes to any of your functions, the entire Lambda is always going to be warm. Super simple stuff, and they do it really smartly. Something that's coming to Vercel soon is also screenshotting code. So screenshotting your initialized code. So once you hit that, again, initialization code of a cold boot, they're just going to take a screenshot of it and just run it in the future. Again, the goal is to make these cold boots as low as possible. And then their support is awesome. So again, if you're struggling with this is what helped us personally. Like, I would go like, I have no idea what's going on here. I would open a ticket, and an actual engineer would go through the bundle with me. This stuff is there. Again, use it. And we're on a team plan. We're paying, like, I think $60 a month or something. Doesn't make sense. So then, choosing the right region. So when a user comes in, right, so let's say they're in the States, and then they're hitting your serverless function. And basically, that function, again, lives somewhere. So let's say it lives in Europe. If your database then, I don't know, is in Shanghai, you are going to deal with lots of latency. And you have the option of specifying region in almost every provider, right? So for example, in Vercel, you can do it. You can say, hey, my database is in Ireland, so I'm going to choose Dublin, Ireland as my serverless function location. That means those real servers, it's not serverless, are there. Cool. And then working with databases, and I have a minute. This should be fun. So connections. When you're working with databases, you have a whole lot of concurrent connections that are happening, right? And you have a limit to that. So for example, on MongoDB, you have a limit of 500 concurrent connections, even if you're working with Mongo serverless. So this is where you should use things like the Prisma Data Proxy that Søren talked about. And then there's schemas that you're dealing with. And then you also want to be scaling, right? So how do we solve all of these? Prisma Cloud comes in here, right? You have, again, the data proxy that's pooling your connections. You have the data explorer, so you're easily able to explore your data. And on top of that, it has environments built in. Why is this important? I can go into data proxy, and I can easily switch right then and there. I don't have to sit on figure out the connection strings every time, and what am I talking to, and who's talking to what. And then MongoDB support means I don't have to worry about migrations, because MongoDB is pretty much schemaless. Again, my goal is to not worry about anything. I just want to build products. I just want to deliver mental health to people. That's it. So, and then you have preview deployments. This is something coming soon in Prisma, where right now, when you are developing something in Vercel, let's say, and you make a new pull request, right? It does a preview deployment. Super cool, right? But then the problem is, if you've made a schema change, let's say, it's not going to work anymore because all of a sudden it's talking to a different database. So what preview deployments for databases will do is it'll give you a new tiny database to work with. And then projections, which are basically going to project your data to things like Elasticsearch as they change. So last bit, at Nuna, we've also chosen to go with MongoDB serverless. What's interesting about this one, I mean, again, it's not serverless. There's an actual Mongo thing going on somewhere, right? But they're scaling it. They're taking care of security. You're on the latest Mongo, blah, blah, blah. The concurrent limit is still there. So just because you're using MongoDB serverless doesn't mean you are not going to need to use the proxy. And then with the proxy, we're getting all the cool Prisma stuff. And that's about it. So again, Nuna is our mental health app. Check it out when you get a chance. And thank you so much. Oh, yes. Q&A. Anyone? In the back.
Can you get a little bit more into detail about when to use serverless versus edge? Because some things seems to be fuzzy there, and it's not for me clear when one would be a good case and when the other one would be.
Sure. So on serverless, you're basically, with serverless versus edge, one of the main things that you're worried about are basically these different limitations. First of all, edge is brand new. So it's something that is coming out right now on Vercel, for example. So it's still in beta. And one of the things that you're going to be dealing with is execution time. So on serverless, you're going to have like about a minute to do things. On edge, you have 15 seconds, so it's a lot less. Another one is size. So you have a 1 megabyte bundle. There are some things that are just really hard to get under that sometimes, depending on what you're doing, and you're going to have to go with serverless. Another thing is working with distributed databases. This one is way more complicated because now you're basically going to have to worry about when you're reading to the database, when you're writing to a database, and if something happens before something. So in general, edge should be used for more, let's say, authentication endpoints. These are usually very easy to go with edge with. Just like anything that can be very, very simple for the most part. What I know for a fact, though, is the Vercel team is trying to get the functionality of edge, so the quickness of edge, if you want to say, out into the public. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but kind of, yes. Anyone else? Cool, amazing. Yep, we have one more.
How do you limit the amount of the requests that's run? Because when there's a billion requests, you're the one that ends up paying for it. How can you prevent like a DDoS costing you a lot of money using serverless?
Yes, you can. So there's a lot of built-in support with most of the serverless providers. For example, again, I'm just saying this because I know it. With Vercel, what they do is in that first, I think minute, I'm not sure what it is. It's like minute or second. Once their DDoS mitigation comes in, anything after that will just be discarded from your bill, right? So, but excellent question, because yes, you're not going to have to pay for anything as long as like they know, okay, cool, like a DDoS happened. There's a lot of mitigation there that's happening. I think it's the same on Cloudflare as well. They do a lot of this.
Hassan, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Please.